Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, resident under slash of under slash Collinwood for BitChute, and I'm here to continue my read-along reviews for John Philip Betancourt's continuing blog series, The Return of Dark Shadows. Series 13, Chapter 2, Speaking in Riddles. The ocean waves crashed up against large black rocks, causing a booming sound that lifted from the ragged coastline up the rigid cliff of Widow's Hill and flowed on to the land that made up the compound of Collinwood. It was a very familiar and consistent racket. Everyone recognized the throbbing heartbeat of the Atlantic in the form of crashing waves. It was by far the most normal thing about Collinsport. The waves, the sea, the sound. Everything else, however, lived in the world of the strange and the bizarre, especially when it came to the family that lived on this land and gave the town its name. In her bedroom, Caleb Collins' governess, Evangeline, kept the secret of being the daughter of Angelique. And Barnabas, very well, no one would have ever guessed, but Elizabeth had a strange suspicion of the young woman from the day she set foot in the mansion due to her old age. David and his wife Kimberly often vetoed all her attempts to set control in the household. Elizabeth's assertiveness was a knee-jerk reflect. It was, after all, her house until the day she died. Unfortunately, the matriarch of the family was now regated to live as a dowager empress, passing the days in her room with only her caretaker, Noel Covert, to keep her company and listen to Elizabeth's frosty complaints toward her nephew and his cunning wife. To her part, Evangeline knew of Elizabeth's suspicions, and for fear of exposure, she kept her distance. That afternoon, Evangeline walked over to her mirror and watched as her beautiful face of blush-toned cheeks slowly morphed into that of India del Archo, the time traveler she trapped inside her own body to keep her away from the family, and thus exposing her to any kind of truth to who or what she was. This was an act of self-preservation that Evangeline thought was as last resort. But India, trapped in this nightmare once again, only wanted to be free and would do and say anything to gain that freedom. Evangeline, please, the echoing voice of India in the mirror said, her eyes watering with tears, you have to let me out. You can help me get home, I promise, that's all I want. Evangeline shook her head. That's impossible. Something has happened, she said in her whispery voice. What? What's happened? Evangeline reached into her pocket and pulled out a golden necklace that she had been wearing when India first encountered her. She then pulled down her cream-colored chiffon blouse, puffy at the sleeves to show burn marks around her neck and chest where the necklace was. I don't understand, India said. This necklace was given to me by a woman who raised me. She was a Carmelite nun with powers that I could only describe as otherworldly. She said the day the undead came back to Collinwood, I would know by this necklace. These burns tell me that day is that is today is that day, Evangeline explained. Barnabas, India assumed, but don't you see, if Barnabas has returned to this time, maybe that's why I'm here. Maybe he wants to help me get back to where I belong. That's why you have to let me out of this mirror. Please. India pleaded as her hands pressed against the other side of the mirror. I can't do that, Evangeline said with a cruel voice. You can't. Of course you can. You can't keep me here forever. You can't do this, India said, her hands now pushing up against the glass so hard that on her side the glass cracked. You don't understand. You still don't understand, Evangeline said. India only looked at the sorceress confused. Her heart was pounding in her chest. All she wanted to do was wake up from the nightmare she was living and get back to where she was from 2019. All she could do was think of her uncle Gabriel, the man who risked his whole life to protect her, and now all she could do was hope and wish he could get her out of this somehow, some way. No, I don't understand, India shouted, slamming her hand against her side of the glass in frustration. Evangeline lifted an eyebrow at India's forcefulness. The last time I saw Barnabas, he said he was leaving for good, and he promised that he would send me back to my time, and now I find myself here. So this must be his doing. He must have done this for a reason. I'm here for a reason, India explained. Barnabas didn't vanish, India, Evangeline said, shocking India. He came back. He came back to his place of rest at Eagle Hill and was released again. He reset the cycle of his life again. Barnabas Collins lived his life just as he had originally. Nothing changed. Victoria arrived in 1966. Willie found him in 1967. He and Julia went off on their journey. It all happened as if it was supposed to happen. Don't you see? He lied to you. He lied to you just like he lied to everyone his whole life. Sorry. Evangeline explained. He went back into his coffin after everything that happened to me? India asked, confused. Yes, he didn't do anything for you, can't you see? He abandoned you, just as he abandoned me. And now he might be back. I can feel that energy. It's awakened. I've been waiting for this for centuries. I can't let you interrupt that, India. I can't, Evangeline said. India was angry. She was furious. She didn't want to believe that Barnabas could have betrayed her this way. But it must be true. It must have been all real. 1990 seemed untouched by the past. And that could only mean that Barnabas did in fact return and was released by Willie Loomis in 1967 and allowed everything to happen just as it had originally, but it didn't matter. In India's eyes, despite his constant betrayals, the young time traveler knew Barnabas, and only Barnabas could send her back to the correct time. Evangeline, listen to me, India pleaded from the mirror. I don't see how keeping me from Barnabas, who's come back to obviously finish what he started, and killing him will help you. He's still your father, India shouted, attempting to buy her time and get to the man she believed could help her, could save her. Barnabas Collins was no father to me. He may have helped conceive me, but he took me from my mother. He took me and left me to be raised as a child of no one. I've been waiting for him. I've been waiting to avenge my mother's life for a very long, long time, Evangeline explained. This is your chance to set things straight. To set everything right, India said again, still trying to buy time for herself by keeping Barnabas alive. Killing Barnabas may only set things off into a different course of reality. Trust me, I know. He tried to fix things in 1966, and they did not go well. At every turn, he made things worse. At every attempt at fixing the past, he made another error, and things got worse. This must be his way of setting things back on the course. If you kill him, that could ruin things, even for you, India explained. But Evangeline was undeterred. She faced India dead in her eyes and smirked. He's going to die. There's nothing you can do or say to stop me. You can't, India screamed back at her, voice shrill and filled with panic and anguish over the idea of being trapped there behind the glass forever. If Barnabas was killed, you can't do that. He's my only hope at getting back in my time, India added. Evangeline stepped closer to the glass of the mirror and tilted her head slightly as if she were looking at her own face and examining its beauty. She could see India's emotions were real, and that perhaps India wasn't sent there to destroy her, but something or someone had come back and brought India with them. Evangeline didn't need anyone to tell her that she could feel it in her body, in her blood. The aching in her bones told her that someone from the world of the undead was now back. The burn marks in her neck were proof. I don't think you'll like my answer, India. I don't think you'll like it one bit. You see, my whole mission in life has been this, to avenge what my father did to my mother. He killed her. He took her away from here and then killed her. Do you know what that has done to me? Do you know what it's like to learn from a nun of what your own father did to you and your mother? This is meant to be. This is what is supposed to happen. Barnabas is somewhere out there. I can feel his heartbeat, and now I have to make sure it all ends. All of it, she explained further. Then I'll die here too, India said, her voice now echoing a deep sadness that perhaps all was lost for her. Evangeline, the daughter of Barnabas and Angelique, slowly got close to the glass and breathed on it, causing it to fog up on a large circle on India's face. Evangeline took her finger and drew a pentagram over her face and covered it with her hand. India began to feel strange. She began to feel her body twitching from the inside out. It was almost as if her insides were collapsing inward into a hole, into a drain. She was being pulled out of the mirror and into a void of nothing, into a void of darkness, where nothing was real and nothing was imagined. You're not going to die, India. You're not even alive yet, Evangeline said in a cold tone of voice that gave India's body shivers. Before India had a chance to reply, her body began to evaporate into what seemed like a mist. She was becoming a fragment piece of time that was now going back to where she came from. India was born in 1990, and because of the laws of duplicity and time, she could not exist in two places at once. India was going back to where she came from, to her mother's Dominique's womb, to be born again in her own legitimate timeline. In a flash of light, the fogged up portion of the mirror with the drawn on pentagram went away. The mirror was now reflecting only Evangeline, who smirked at her own beautiful face. See you soon, she said softly in the mirror. India D'Archer was gone back to her own place and time to be born another day. At the old house, the smell of burning wood from the fireplace in the drawing room filled the room that had been filled old and new furniture from the house's inhabitants, Noelle and her nephew Cameron. Noelle had decorated the home with some help of her employer Elizabeth Collins Stoddard, whom she was the caretaker of. Everything on its surface seemed quaint and lovely, warm, inviting, but on the inside, in truth, things were about to become much stranger. Secrets were about to be revealed, especially as Cameron met his aunt's house guest, Justin Patterson. Justin has been turned into a vampire in 1966 and found by Noel in the Collins family crypt, hiding, hoping his love, India, would find him. He was a member of the world of the undead. His present, his life force was who Evangeline was feeling, not Barnabas. Cameron sat down slowly onto the sofa that was a dark maroon color. His hands nervously went over to the seams of the cushions over and over again, as if he was feeling for something, searching for anything to take his mind on what his aunt needed to tell him. She was in a serious mood, and the man with her had an equally serious expression. "What's going on? What do you have to tell me?" Cameron asked, still fiddling nervously with the soft cushion. Noelle sat down across from her nephew. "Cam, I have to talk to you about." She paused and looked at Justin, who was meandering toward the front window. "I have to talk to you about something that happened many years ago," she said. "Okay," Cameron said, looking over at Justin and unsure of what was to come. "This is Justin Patterson. Justin is a..." She paused, unsure of how to explain Justin. "A very old friend of mine, but who's just come back to town," she said. "But there's more to it than that. I think you should explain him where I come from, Noel, and how he's connected," Justin said in a slow growl of a voice. "Connected?" Cameron replied, confused. Noel wasn't sure where to start. It had been so many years since she followed Carolyn to Europe and adopted Cameron right out from under her nose. It was so many years ago that she found Justin and took him away from the crypt and kept him safe in her own on her until the right moment. It had been years and years since her brother Beau's disappearance, and so many years since she came into the Collins household to work for Liz. But Justin's awakening was the moment she had been waiting for. It was the message from the beyond to tell her that now everything would start to move forward, and the truth of Beau's disappearance would finally come true. She could tell Cameron that he was in fact a Collins too. "It's about how you were born and how I became your guardian," Noel began. "Tell him," Justin said, still staring out of the window of the old house. "Tell him now." Noelle took a deep breath and opened her mouth and began to tell the story. The story of Carolyn, Justin, Beau. The story of how she came to where she was and what she needed to get to the truth. London, England, 1966. A young blonde screamed and withered in pain on a hospital bed as a doctor and two nurses quickly rushed in. She was reaching for one of the nurses and grabbed her hand and squeezed. The nurse looked down at the patient and smiled behind her medical mask and whispered, "It's going to be okay." The blonde woman screamed and grabbed at her throbbing stomach and screamed again. She was having a child. A new baby was to be born in this hospital. "Please, there's so much pain," the woman said. "It's okay, Carolyn. This will help," the other nurse said as she filled a syringe and poked it into the vial that filled the IV into the woman's veins. The medicine soon swirled through Carolyn's bloodstream and calmed her. The pain subsided, and she laid back in the hospital bed, sweating and aching, but the sharp pains of her belly gone like the flickering of a light switch. The first nurse squeezed Carolyn's hand again as the doctor began to count backwards from 5. "On 1, you push, all right? Ready?" the doctor said, crouching down, ready for the baby to be born. "Okay," Carolyn said, weak and sleepy from the medicine. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Push, Carolyn. Go on, push, the doctor said. Carolyn pushed as the first nurse squeezed her hand. The other nurse stood behind the doctor with a towel ready for the new baby. It felt like hours, but it was only minutes, and soon a new baby was in the world. It's a boy, the doctor announced, asking the first nurse, who was holding Carolyn's hand, to cut the cord. The first nurse, an American too, had tears in her eyes and cut the cord. Emotional, the second nurse said to the first nurse as she cleaned off the baby. It's just so wonderful, the first nurse said. Carolyn looked up, noticing the American accent coming from the nurse who was holding her hand. It had been so long since she heard someone else talk like she did. You're American? Carolyn said as the first nurse cleaned off the sweat from Carolyn's forehead. The nurse nodded yes. All right, Miss America, you can take the baby off to the nursery, please, the first nurse said, handing the cream-colored baby boy to the first nurse. The first nurse, her eyes lit with glee, grabbed tightly to the new child as Carolyn's sad eyes looked on. She had already signed the release papers for the baby to be adopted, but it hurt still, it ached, it was wrenching, but it had to be done. The first nurse quickly walked the baby, swaddled in the white blanket with the blue trim, into the neonatal unit and removed her mask. It was Noel Covert, the biological aunt to the baby boy that she helped bring into the world, and in days she would adopt as her own. Her brother's baby boy would be raised on her own care. It would be protected and loved. It had only taken a few months and legal paperwork for Noel to take full custody of the new baby. But it worked just as she planned. She returned to Collinsport soon after with the baby, her nephew, a boy she named Cameron, and gave him the fake last name of Frame. Now back in the seaside town in Maine, Noel put the baby down in a new bassinet as he slept and walked down into the basement of her home. She had been gone for a few months, while in England following Carolyn, and had left something in the basement asleep. She slowly walked down the dark steps and made it to the center of the basement, where she pulled on a long string that turned onto a single light bulb, illuminating a halo-like spotlight around her. She stood at the center of that spotlight from the light bulb and stared at a large trunk-shaped object directly in front of her, shadow and obscure. Noelle slowly made her way out of the spotlight, step by step, slowly making her way towards a large trunk that, as Noelle got closer to it, it could be revealed to be a large coffin that she had constructed for her new friend, the man she found in the depths of the Collins family crypt, Justin Patterson, the vampire. Noah opened the coffin. The basement light cast Noel's shadow over Justin's sleeping face. I've come back, as I promised, Justin. It's all done. We can now begin. We can get our revenge now. I did it. I got the baby. We can start, she said, in a whispery voice. Sorry. 1990. So all this time you lied to me. You told me my father and mother died, and that's how you came to raise me. You've been lying to me all this time, Cameron said, shocked to hear the story of Carolyn being his mother. I had to. I couldn't tell you what really happened, Noelle said. And who's this? Who is he? Why does he know more about my life than I did? Cameron shouted as he stood up quickly from the sofa. That's another part of the story I come across. Justin, who, well, he also has dealings with the Collins family, Noah said vaguely. Like what? Cameron asked to Noah's blank expression. The Collins family helped make me who I am today. Let's leave it at that. What does that even mean? Cameron replied, frustrated. Cameron said before Noelle said before being interrupted by her nephew. This is look, I don't know what to say. You've been lying to me all these years. You said we were alone, that we didn't have any more family, and this whole time we've been living steps away from the people who I'm related to. How could you? Cameron shouted. Cameron, you can't tell them that you know. You're Carolyn's son. You can never tell them. Noah shouted. Why? Why can't I? Cameron asked. Because, Noah screamed back. Tell me why, Cameron shouted back as Justin took control of the conversation by dropping a bomb. Because they killed your father, Justin shouted over them all. Shocked for different reasons, Noelle and Cameron both turned and looked at the vampire. Noelle sighed in disappointment and closed her eyes as if to block out the truth, and sat back down on the chair facing Cameron, who was still standing. He was frozen in place, but managed to tilt his head back towards Justin, who dropped the bomb about Cameron's father's murder. What? Is that true? Cameron asked. Noelle shook her head. She had never been sure if Bill's vanishing had anything to do with the Collins family, but she had always had her suspicions, and in truth couldn't figure out any other explanation. I believe so, yes, Noelle replied softly. Cameron was furious. He was angry. He felt betrayed and reached over and grabbed his coat and charged for the foyer of the old house. He turned back and looked at a stoic and handsome Justin, who had no emotion on his face whatsoever, and his Aunt Noelle, who seemed crushed, but at the same time relieved that her secret wore out, most of them anyway. Cameron shook his head in disgust and left. That's not how I wanted to tell him about Beau, Justin. I. How could you be so cold? Noelle said as the fireplace cracked and popped, a glowing orange light in her finely aged face. I'm sorry. You baby him. I needed the truth out so that we could get and move on with our plan. I've been waiting 25 years to reunite with India. You've been promising me with no result. Cameron had to know. It had to be said, Justin said as he sat down. Now the truth is out. We can begin our process. And we can both get what we want, Justin added. India, this was all about India for you, wasn't it? Noelle asked. You'll get your revenge on the Collins family, too, eventually. Once any evidence is found, you can always just use those powers of yours, Justin replied, reminding her of the pact and hinting at her own supernatural abilities. Noelle narrowed her eyes. You're selfish. I told you using my powers only brings in the darkness that created them. You pushed me, you kept pushing, Noelle said, frustrated with what she had done. You moved too slow. You told me 2 years ago that in the year 1990 the stars would align in a figment in the sky that would be your sign. Look at the calendar, Noelle. The time is now. Those stars align this week, Justin replied, proving he'd been waiting for the sign Noelle told him about. Noelle hoped he wouldn't have been paying attention. She was having second thoughts and was hoping that she could take care of everything in a different way without the unpredictability of a volatile, the volatility of Justin on Patterson, but it was too late. He had the taste of blood in his mouth and he wanted what was promised. I don't know if it's safe for India here anymore. I don't know if you're good for her anymore. You're different. Don't you think she'll notice you're not the same man anymore? Noel asked, unsure of how Justin would react to her backtracking. She loves me and I love her. I would never hurt her. I wanted to bring her to this time so that we could be together. You told me I couldn't be with her until the moment was right. This is the moment you agreed, Justin reminded Noel. Maybe I'm having second thoughts, Noel said, turning away from Justin, embarrassed about her involvement in the scheme. Justin fumed in frustration. He had waited years and years to be reunited with India after Noel discovered him in the Collins family mausoleum. He pressured, or sorry, he pursued over the years to help him, but she refused. She was constantly putting it off. She was waiting for the right moment. They finally agreed to bring India. The catalyst to all the horrors in 1966 would be the perfect timing to begin the exposure of the Collins family and what they were. But having Cameron as a collateral damage didn't sit well with Noel. Justin growled a monster's moan at Noel's attempt to back out of their plan. He reached for Noel's arm and pulled her round to face him and look him in the eyes. His eyes turning red like fire filled coals, his canine teeth lengthening and turning into two sharp dagger fangs. His breath, hot and ready, thirsty, ready to attack. Justin, no, stop this, let go. Noel said, trying to rip his hand off him. You promised me you would help me bring India here. You promised to help me if I helped you. Now it's time to pay up. I will kill who you need for India in return. Just give me the name and I will slaughter them. I want India, Justin shouted, his mouth filled splitting, spitting with anger. I, Noel couldn't muster the words. If you back out now, I swear to God, Noel, I will kill Cameron right in front of you, he threatened. Noel's face changed from fearful to serious. She had no reason to believe that Justin wouldn't kill anyone to get what he wanted. She saw just how cold he had turned, and how he didn't care about who he hurt or who he destroyed in the process. Her nephew was now in danger and a target. Noel pulled her arm and free and snarled at the vampire in front of her. I hope you two are happy together, Noel said, her words a veiled confirmation that she would help him get India. She stormed out of the room, leaving Justin to his own thoughts of love and the beautiful India, who he had yet to discover was now gone for good thanks to Evangeline. He would soon find out, and when he did, someone would pay with their lives. Lives. Um, that's the read along. I gotta get a different chair. Chalked it up with the wife. But really interesting. I thought Justin was the one who sort of pulled her to 1990, and he was. Justin Patterson has really changed as the vampire. I was wrong. I didn't think vampirism would really change who Justin was, but vampirism did change who Justin was. Justin was not this cold and calculating, but Justin has become cold and calculating. Well, he was calculating, but he was more smart calculating and nice. Now he's just become cold and he's ready to kill. I think Noelle is between a literal rock and hard place because she has no idea what Evangeline did. And Evangeline, I said she would be a huge X factor in this, and yeah, she is. I'm curious to see a couple things. One, what is David going to make of the rope now? The rope he saw in the first chapter of series 13. Is he going to confront Evangeline about that or question her about that? Is he going to tell his Aunt Elizabeth? Um, what is going to be Noelle's next move? Because it better be. My advice to her would be, girl, if you know where his coffin is, grab a stake, grab a hammer, take care of business. Um, that's my advice to Noelle. If you're in the sound of my voice, stake, hammer. You can do it, girl. You got this. Just don't do it at night because it'll be too late. I do think that it's very interesting that Justin was literally dead set on bringing India to 1990. And, in 1990, that's when India was born. So she doesn't, Evangeline's right. Claudia's right. She doesn't exist. You can't exist in this in two timelines. She has no body. Evangeline could have left her in her body, but she didn't. She put her in a mirror, which was smart. It's like you can't really exist here without a body, and you don't exist here. Again, you can't occupy two spaces when you don't exist in another, in that realm. And she doesn't exist yet. She's going to be born in 1990, So I think it's interesting that. Do I think India is totally gone? Um, oh wow, I'm going to commit to this answer. No. See how this is? I feel like I'm watching a football game. A misdirect is a coming. Um, but I'm curious to also find out. We really haven't got too much out of Kimberly yet, so I'm curious to what she'll be like with David. We know Kimberly is very cunning. Mind you, Kimberly once experimented on her son DNA. God, that woman. Like, hey, your other son you're gonna have? Yeah, yeah, you're gonna experiment on him. Yeah. Caleb's brother. Yeah, yeah. Don't do it. But she will. So I'm curious to see. I'm also curious to see, will Kimberly, are we going to get any of Kimberly and David's marriage falling apart? I am curious of that. So it'll be interesting to see because remind you, Kimberly does leave David. So I haven't forgotten that. I still have to do my Dark Shadows, Return of Dark Shadows Revisited tour. God, I've got a lot to do. Um, I need to get myself cloned. I'm sure Julie won't mind too of me. But I'm pretty, yeah, she won't mind. But anyway, really, really good. I like the scene setting. Obviously, is always good. The characters are really interesting. You have now Cameron, who's upset with Noelle. Noelle knows that Justin is just out for himself now, and that's all the more dangerous because he's willing to kill anybody. I mean, this is straight Michael Myers psychotic. Well, well, you know. See, you could write a Halloween. I know John's gonna listen to this. You could write a Halloween. Um, all right. Link's gonna be in the description box. I'm really curious to see where this goes and what else is coming. I can't believe this is it. I have a bit of doubt that this is the total end of it, But we'll see. We'll see. I think it's really really good. It's just it's amazing that you have now all these characters and things are lining up, and to see where this is going to go is going to be really really interesting. Link will be in the description box, guys. I hope you enjoyed the read along. Have a good night.